Hello, and welcome to another episode of Joy Meets World. I am your host, Joy Yugi, and this is a podcast about me and my dog Quincy traveling around the U.S., visiting the national parks. And today I will be talking about Yellowstone National Park. So, when we left off, I was in Martin City, Montana, visiting Glacier National Park, which is in northern Montana. The park actually borders the Canada border. And I traveled to Cook City, Montana, which is on the southernmost border of Montana. It's on the border with Wyoming. And Cook City is just a couple of miles from one of the north entrances to Yellowstone National Park. So it was a 450-mile trip. It took us 8 hours. We took it slow because there were lots of animals on the road. So we saw a ton of elk and deer in northern Montana. Lots of kamikaze ones running beside my car and at my car and in the road. So we just took it slow and we watched for animals. Um, on the way to Cook City, closer to Yellowstone Park, we got to see sheep, bighorn sheep. I got to see a bald eagle on the side of the road, and of course the buffalo once we were in the park. So all roads in Yellowstone are closed, and most of the entrances are closed. The only entrances that are open are the north entrances. So the north entrance starts in Gardner, Montana, and then you can take a road about an hour and a half drive all the way to Cook City, Montana. But that's a dead end because the road out of Cook City that goes north away from Yellowstone is closed after the town. It's just essentially covered in snow, and they haven't paved it, and they haven't plowed it, and they won't until the spring, the same as the rest of the roads in Yellowstone. So really the only way out in and out of Cook City, which is where I was staying, was through Yellowstone. The park is not that busy. Of course, there's only one road open. There's not much to do and see. So it wasn't crowded. And at the same time, though, there wasn't much to see. Pretty much the only thing that was open is some hiking trails that weren't covered in snow. I think a lot of people could take snowmobiles in and snowmobile out in Yellowstone. That was, the places that were still covered in snow. But the only thing really available to see were the Mammoth Hot Springs, which are on the north side of the park, and which I did see. So all the things that you think of when you think of Yellowstone, Old Faithful, were not open to see at this time in March. They open at the end of May, unbeknownst to me. But you learn something new every day. So the cabin I was staying at in Cook City was primitive. It was, I would say, one step up from camping. When I got there, of course, the roads through Yellowstone and the main road in Cook City was plowed, but as soon as I turned into the little road in the neighborhood that my cabin was in, it was not plowed, let's just say that. And it was the type of snow where it had, probably snowed a foot and nobody had plowed. And so it had melted a little bit, frozen overnight, melted a little bit, frozen overnight. And that had been happening, I would say, for probably a week. And so that was kind of the snowy, slushy stuff I was driving in. It was more like ice that I was driving in. And unfortunately, my Airbnb, it wasn't the best Airbnb I've ever stayed in. They've never, it looked like, shoveled or plowed the driveway, which is just a short driveway, just essentially a parking spot. But it was a solid sheet, I would say, a foot thick of ice. So very, very dangerous to walk on, and a little scary to drive on too. Not my favorite part. I will say throughout the week, it was a warm week in that area. So, of course, the nights and the mornings were in the single digits. But by the middle of the day, it was in the high 40s or the 50s most days. And so a lot of that snow melted. They did bring a plow around and plowed the roads. So that was good. what was incredible about Yellowstone and just where I was staying, you just walked out the door and there were just mountains right there, right there. So essentially, I was staying in a little valley, and the Beartooth Mountains were all around. And that's just something I've never gotten over on this entire trip, how you can just walk out the front door and just be surrounded by these huge snow-capped mountains. It's one of my favorite things. I've never experienced that before, and I just can't get over it. It's amazing. So Yellowstone is America's first national park. It was formed in 1872. And fun fact, it is halfway between the equator and the North Pole. So it's right in the middle of the continent. The buffalo was probably my favorite part of coming to the park, or the bison. And it's just so great. I think I liked it the most because you learn about the buffalo. It's such an iconic part of the West, that you hear about, that you read about, and to actually see them and put an image to what you've learned about or heard about is just so cool. I got stopped 4 or 5 times by the buffalo. Classic Yellowstone thing to happen. Most of the stops happened on my way out of Yellowstone, my last day when we were traveling to our next destination. They just seemed to not want to stay in the grass. They really loved the road that day. I think probably I would have been more irritated by the buffalo if it had been in the busy season of Yellowstone, but since I was the only car pretty much on the road, it didn't bother me too much. I just waited a couple of minutes for them to move, but there were a couple of times where they were just looking at me and I just didn't think they were going to move. They just seemed like they were content to stand in the middle of the road. The last time we had a run-in, I was crossing a bridge, a long bridge across the Yellowstone River in the park. And at the very same time, some buffalo decided that they wanted to cross the bridge too. And they just happened to get in front of me before I crossed the bridge. And so we crossed it together, and there was a baby at the end who I was kind of following. I felt like I was hurting them a little bit. They acted like I was hurting them a little bit. So that was a really fun experience. A little bit about the city that I was staying in, Cook City. It didn't have any cell service, which I didn't know going in, but thankfully it had internet, which meant I can obviously do video calls, and the text messaging still worked, so that was good. Apparently they only take cash at most places there. It snowed twice when I was there, so it was kind of crazy weather, which of course in that part of Montana, I've heard it is, but it would, it snowed one day all day, but there was no accumulation. It was about like an inch of accumulation, and then the next day it was in the high 40s and everything melted. So the weather was the temperatures were a little bit wacky. The weather was a little bit wacky, but we were safe and sound. The Mammoth Hot Springs, which was pretty much the only feature that was open for tours at the park at this time of year, are made up of upper and lower terraces. So there's about 50 hot springs. And when you think of like a traditional hot spring, a pool of water, these looked different than that. And that's because that area, the Mammoth Hot Springs area, is all limestone, which is soft, which means the travertine, which is what the hot springs kind of put out at the top, grows a lot faster than other types of hot springs. Essentially, you can go on my Instagram and look at my pictures and my reels, but essentially it looks like an underground cave turned inside out and made of white rock because it's travertine at the top. So how they're formed is rain and snow seep down all the way down, really, really far down into the earth, and where there's still active magma. When the magma heats the water, and then it rises up. The steam rises up through fissures, and as it does, it's mixing with carbon dioxide. And then once it on its way up, it's dissolving the limestone that part of the park is made out of, and it's taking it up with it. And then once it reaches the top, it deposits the limestone on the top, and the limestone hardens again and turns into travertine. There are also, so once it turns into travertine, right, it pools into hot water and it flows down the sides of these giant, tall, white, kind of stepped formations. And then the biotherms, they're these tiny little creatures. You can't even see them, they're microscopic, but they feed on the carbon dioxide that comes up with the water, and they turn different colors. So the pools are like these greens and blues and reds, and it's because that's the color the biotherms turn as they're like eating and digesting the CO2. So it's really, really pretty, the white mixed with all these different colors. One of the most well-known formations is called the Liberty Cap, and it looks like this tall hat, essentially, this tall dome, this tall cone, essentially. And apparently what happened is there was so much pressure in that part of the park, for like hundreds of years. It was shooting water just straight up. There was so much pressure. And so the limestone deposited in this like cap shape. So that was really cool to see. Some of the springs are running, some of them are not running, and apparently that can change on a day-to-day basis, just depending on where the water decides it wants to come out that day. So, anytime you visit the park, a different spring in Mammoth Springs could be running. There was a slight sulfuric smell. So if you listen to my last in Volcanic National Park podcast, you'll know that those kind of hot springs they're the sulfur hot springs, and they stink really bad. These were not as bad. It was just a slight sulfur smell. So definitely not as bad, but it was there. If you want to see the Mammoth Hot Springs, you can go onto the Yellowstone National Park website. They have a live webcam, and they have a video that you can watch that really gives you a good overview. So that was my trip to Yellowstone National Park. It was really cool for what it was worth. Montana is beautiful. Wyoming is beautiful, and I'm so glad I got to see it, to see the mountains and, the buffalo, and just to be out there. I do want to go back to see Yellowstone when all of the parts of the park are open, so probably in the summer, and to see Grand Teton National Park, which is abuts it on the south side, closer to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And so I would love to see those two parks together, and to do it in the summer when everything is open and everything is accessible. So I would definitely go back and see those two parks. But that's it for now. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, rate and review it. Follow me on YouTube if you want. Follow me on Instagram if you want. You can find me at JoyYugi. And until next time, I wish you happy travels wherever life is taking you.